Good morning and welcome back, ladies, gents and Pikachus, to this special anniversary of Israel's great victory over the Muslims episode of the analysis and breakdown of the Quran of the Muslims. Yes, we're back once again to break this thing down verse by verse into factual, logical statements in English so that you and I can understand who or what is Allah, what does he mean by the contents of his book here, and more importantly for us, how does this affect us in our lives today? So, before I start, as I always do, I'm going to tell you now, if you have any doubts or questions as to my factual accuracy, please first buy and read one of these, a Tajweed Quran with the meanings translated into English, and after having done so, you will recognise that every single word I'm about to tell you now, or have previously said, is 100% true of the words of Islam, and what Muslims believe today, despite their many protestations and shameful lies, because they are extremely embarrassed about this. If they call themselves Muslim, this is what they believe. So, if you've been keeping up with the series, you'll remember that in the last few episodes, Allah had forgotten that he was supposed to be guiding his Muslims in truth, and instead had elected to use his extremely lengthy and boring verses to warn them about praying to Jesus, trying to become Christian, or even spending time talking to and listening to Christians or Jews. Despite the fact that he said he has power over all things, he gave them a choice of either doing what they're told with him, or not doing what they're told with him and listening to the advice of those evil Christians and Jews, and incurring the great wrath of Allah. So I guess it's not predetermined, is it, Allah? But anyway, that's where we got up to, so let's carry on where we left off last time, which was page 19, verse 120. So just because I know the Muslims will bitch and whine and say that I haven't translated it properly or I haven't said the correct words, this is the part we will be reading, this part here, and we begin with verse 120. So, let's carry on. 120. Never will the Jews or Christians be satisfied with you unless thou follow their form of religion. Say, the guidance of Allah, that is the only true guidance. Wert thou to follow their desires after the knowledge which has reached thee, then thou wouldst find neither protector nor helper against the wrath of Allah. End of verse. So straight away we see he has not quite finished bitching and whinging and gossiping about those evil Christians and Jews. Now he's implanting the idea in the minds of his Muslims that we are not going to be satisfied until we convert all his Muslims back to the way of truth. Which isn't really what we are interested in. I mean, obviously we would prefer it if the Muslims of the world were peaceful and they weren't living in poverty and blaming it all on Christians and Jews. If they weren't starting these ridiculous wars and attacking civilians, yes, we would be far happier. But to say we're not satisfied with ourselves unless they follow our religion is not true. We're more than satisfied with Jesus Christ and our peaceful lives, the level of prosperity and education that we have attained here in the West. We're more than happy with that. We're actually pitying of Muslims, is what that is, and we would much prefer them to have happier, more joyful lives through dropping this ridiculous evil cult that they worship and realising that Allah is Satan. But if they don't, and they go to hell and burn forever, you know, it's just one of those things, isn't it? Like, we would prefer if they didn't. We would prefer if they became peaceful, normal human beings with morals and a good education. But if they don't, what can you do? So that's where we stand on that. But let's go back to Allah's verses. So that's what that means. Then he says of his Muslims, say to them, the Christians and Jews, if you're a Muslim, only the guidance of Allah. Only the guidance of Allah will do well for you. And then he says in a quote, the guidance of Allah, that is the only true guidance. So despite being on page 19 of his Quran, he's already kind of suggesting that there is already a true guidance out there that a lot of other people, 2 out of the 3 groups mentioned, so 66% of everyone who is mentioned in the Quran is already doing this other guidance. And they seem to be very happy with it. In fact, they are saying to the remaining third, the Muslims, perhaps it'd be better for you if you did this. So that's where we are, but Allah's trying to cover this up with lies and deception by making out like those other 2/3 are completely wrong. Wert thou to follow their desires for knowledge, which thou hast reached, then you would find no helper nor protector against the wrath of Allah. So he is saying, even though 2/3 of the world are not Muslims, and they seem happy enough, if you follow them, O Muslims, nobody will help or protect you against my wrath, says Allah to his Muslims. So it's another veiled threat against his dear Muslims, his beloved Muslims, who he bullies and enslaves. He's telling them straight, don't you dare be a Christian or a Jew Muslim, or off with your head, you're dead. Allah's a very angry, loving God. It's almost like he's got a split personality. He talks of love just before he threatens them. It's almost like a narcissistic boyfriend. That's Allah. Allah's the narcissistic boyfriend, and Muslims are the battered wife. According to him anyway, but let's carry on. Then he says, you would find no helper nor protector against Allah. So what he's saying there is, don't believe in Jesus, he can't protect or help you, not against me, who is Allah. So again, we see Allah is very, very similar to the way we see Satan. Satan does that. Satan threatens you with violence, tries to enslave you with lies and deception and threats, and at the very end of his diatribe says, nobody else can help you, not even God or Jesus. Nobody can help you because Allah is Satan. So he's pretty much admitting it there. But we need to go through the rest of this page to really put a fine dot on the I of evil when we're talking about Islam. So we move on, that's what that means. 121. Those to whom we have sent the book, study it as it should be studied. They are the ones that believe therein and reject the faithless ones. Their loss shall be their own. End of verse. So, if we break this one down, he's still talking about Christians. I feel like there's a certain element of jealousy about Allah here, because he seems to think that the Christians and Jews doing rather well puts a dent in his plans. So it's almost like the opposite of what he said. He said the Christians and Jews will never be satisfied unless everyone follows their religion. But it sounds like he's the one who's whinging about the Christians and Jews not wanting to follow his form of religion, because they've already got one that is better given to them by God, which doesn't involve genocidally murdering the entire rest of the species. You know, we're trying to give salvation to the rest of the species, and if they don't take it, we just leave them alone. Not so with Allah, who will kill you and punish you, and there will be no helper or protector from his wrath if you don't do exactly what you're told by Allah. This is more reasons why we think he is Satan. So he carries on with the verse. Those to whom we have sent the book, study it as it should be studied. Now, when he says, those to whom we have sent the book, remember how a minute ago, like literally like on the last page, he was saying, Christians and Jews are people of the book. So the book is not this book. If people of the book are studying the Torah and the Gospels, then the Torah and the Gospels, the Holy Bible, that is the book. But anyway, he's forgotten about that and gone back to his original theory, which obviously we know now to be false through archaeology and physical factual history. The book, in its guidance sure and true, means the Holy Bible. But he wants you to think it's this one that came much later and is copied from that one. So that's what he means when he says the book. And when he says, to those whom we have sent the book, he's not talking about Christians and Jews. He's talking about Muslims whom he sent this book to, which is not the book. Study it as it should be studied. They are the ones that believe therein. So he's saying everyone who studies the Quran in the way that Allah tells them to, they're the real guys, they're the real Jews. The other ones, Moses and his actual Jews, they're just fake. You know, don't listen to them. And they're Jesus guy. I mean, they're not real either, says Allah. They are the ones that believe therein. Those who reject the faith therein, the loss is their own. So he's saying it's their loss if they don't want to be slaves of Allah, but I'm still going to get you to kill them. So it's not their own loss, it's actually everybody's loss. Because if you think about it, Muslims, even throughout this book, without the help of the Jews and Christians, you are constantly in poverty, starving and getting killed in your own wars. Whereas at the points where Jews and Christians are helping you, you are suddenly rich and wealthy and fed and powerful. Think about it. What was happening in Egypt before Moses turned up? The Pharaoh had his many gods and Arabs were nowhere. Then Allah turns up and says to the Pharaoh, why don't you take the Jews hostage, take them as slaves in the desert? And as soon as he takes Moses and the Jews hostage and makes them slaves in the desert, 7 plagues befall Egypt. Egypt then has all its soldiers destroyed, loses its entire military power, and is put into poverty, and the slaves all leave. Then straight away Israel start doing really well, despite leaving with nothing. You know, they're ex-slaves. They don't even have a weapon. The only thing they have to their names is a copy of the Torah as it's being written from Moses and the blessings of Yahweh. But they go across to the desert and they set up this huge, amazing miracle city of Israel, and they start doing really well. So they're really well fed. They're doing so well in terms of technological advancement that Allah even thinks that it's demons. They've got such good technology. Allah tells Muslims it must be demons that he sent over that's causing that great technology, and it must be magic. But it's not, it's just good technology based on a foundation of peaceful living, good education, reading the Bible and praying to God, not Satan. And then we look at Egypt. Egypt are in abject poverty and have an internal strife going on where half the time they're at war with Allah, and then half the time Allah is brutally putting down these rebellions by killing his own people, making them ever more in slavery and taking away their freedoms, and constantly for 18 pages whinging about the prosperity and fortunes of those evil Christians and Jews over there. And the reason they're getting that good fortune is him. That's what he said. Allah said, for a time they will do well, later on we'll go and kill them. That will be the prophecy. So Allah's taking the credit for the Jews and Christians being rich and well fed. But think about it, O Muslims. If Allah loves you and hates the Jews and Christians, why is he making the Jews and Christians rich and well fed and having prosperity in Israel and the Christian nations, while his Arab nations are doing very poorly, have no food, are at war, are cursed and have disease and have nothing to eat? And have no freedom? You ever thought about that? So if he loves you more, why is he letting the Jews and Christians do so well and having you live in abject, disgusting poverty? We don't know, but therefore we have to keep reading the Quran of the Muslims so that we can understand the weird setup of Allah's great mercy that he seems to be giving straight to his enemies. That's what this means. You know what? I don't even have to script these. I'm literally just reading a verse, telling you how it sounds. Reading a verse, telling you how it sounds. And that is how it does sound, and how it is. Allah claims he loves his Muslims, but then puts them in poverty and has them warring against each other, losing against their enemies. Allah hates the Jews and Christians, but they go into the middle of a desert where there's nothing as ex-slaves with no property. Within 30 years, they are a huge, powerful nation of Israel with a huge army, and they have such good technology that Muslims think it's magic. Come on, guys, seriously. God has blessed those guys is what that is, and they're doing really well as a result of being peaceful, educated, nice people with God's blessings. And you Muslims have put yourselves in a hole of poverty and war because you are following Satan. It's just you don't know he's called Satan because you think he's called Allah and you think he's God. So that's what that means. And he finishes off by saying, the loss will be their own, you know, those who don't follow Allah. Hang on a minute, Allah, what do you mean loss? You just said they're doing really well over there, and the reason they're doing really well is because of you. So how is it their own loss when they're doing really well? And your guys are so jealous, they're actually whinging about it. Like you're having to quell rebellions against your own Muslims by killing them and enslaving them because they are not worshipping you properly, despite the fact that you threaten to kill them and they're your slaves. Whereas those guys over there are not slaves, they're free to choose, but they are choosing God and they're doing really well. How do you work that out, Muslims? Oh, that's right, you just blindly follow Allah like a dumb Muslim child because you have to. You have any doubts or questions, off with the head you're dead, and you will be punished with no virgins. You're not allowed any virgins if you don't follow Allah. And obviously your life aspirations are so lofty that all you care about is dying in a war and then having holy virgins for the rest of eternity. You fucking morons. Anyway, apologies for the swearing, let's carry on. That's what that means. 122. O children of Israel! So now we're back to the old hating on the Jews bit because Allah has realised his Muslims are not very happy about the way that Allah seems to have set things up for them, i.e. empowering his enemies and making them poor and hungry. O children of Israel, call to mind the special favour which I bestowed upon you, and that I preferred you to all others for my message. Even though your message went to Mohammed, who was famous for killing Jews and enslaving their wives, and the special favour that you bestowed upon Israel at the end of Moses' escape was, and I quote, you said, "We hate you, you filthy ape Jews. We're going to kill you all. We're going to destroy Israel. This is my prophecy. My Allah's justice on you, the Jews, will be swift." End quote. That was your prophecy. That's the special favour you bestowed upon the Jews, O Allah. So maybe you're having a little senile moment here and you've actually forgotten that you said that like 6 pages ago. Or you are just outright lying to your Muslims to try to take their mind off the fact that they're doing so poorly in life because of you and your bad guidance. Maybe that's what this is. Is that another lie? I think so. What we at now, guys? 35 mistakes and 6.5 lies. 6 big lies, 1 little half lie. Then he finishes off by saying, "Remember that I bestowed this upon you, and I preferred you to all others for my message." Now, what is Allah's message? Think about this. If Allah preferred the Jews to hear his message, what is his message? His message is that Moses is evil and that Yahweh isn't real and that Israel is the source of the world's evils and needs to be destroyed along with all the Jews. Now, why would you prefer Israel and the Jews, O Allah, graceful and wise Allah? Why would you prefer the Jews for the message that the Jews are evil and should be killed? Perhaps this is another lie. 7 lies now and a half. So that's what that means, and we carry on. Now we're going to get to the more interesting part of the page. 123. Then guard yourselves, O Jews, guard yourselves against a day when one soul shall not avail another, nor shall compensation be accepted from her, nor shall intercession, profit, or help be offered from anyone on the outside. End of verse. So a nice, strong, warlike, hateful verse from Allah here. Now he's finished whinging about how good the Jews and Christians are doing, but still taking credit for it, then saying, despite his genocidal prophecy from earlier that he's going to murder all the Jews and blow up Israel and do this swiftly, and that they're filthy, evil apes, now he is saying, "Remember that I preferred you all, Jews, I loved you all, Jews. In fact, I preferred you to Muslims at first, but then you rebelled against me, so now I'm stuck with these arsehole Muslims instead of you Jews, and that's the reason why I'm saying this in 123. Then guard yourselves against a day," capital D, so he's talking about the final day of judgment, you know, when he resurrects all the dead people and kills them again, so that he can create his paradise full of virgins for the Muslims. "Guard yourselves against a day when one soul shall not avail another." So how would a soul avail another soul? Can I avail your soul? Can you avail someone else's soul? Or is he talking about Jesus, who avails everybody's soul by way of shedding his blood, his holy God blood, and saving the entire species through resurrecting and defeating death? Is that what he's talking about here? Well, I think so, because as we went through, you can't avail my soul, I can't avail your soul. We can't do anything with souls apart from use our soul to live a good life. But he's talking about the day of judgment when we're all dead, so we can't do anything at that point. So what he's saying here, O Muslims and Jews and Christians alike, Allah is saying to the Jews, guard yourselves against the final day. You just wait, O Jews, I'm going to get ya. That's what he's saying. This is a threat not only to Muslims, but now to Jews and Christians to wait for that final day when he's going to murder everyone, then he's going to raise them from the dead, then he's going to murder them again, then the Jews are going to get their paradise created, then they're going to get their holy virgins. That's how things work in the mind of Allah, O wise and loving, divine, creative God, according to himself. But we know better. Then the last thing he says is, nor shall compensation be accepted from her, as in her being Israel. So he's saying Israel won't be able to pay their way out of trouble. Nor shall intercession or profit or help from the outside be any help. So he's saying they can't negotiate, they can't use allies, they can't build up strong armies of numbers, they can't pay their way out of it, they can't have intercession from other friends or Jesus or anyone else. There is nothing at all that is going to stop Allah from destroying the Jews and Christians and Israel on that final day of judgment, because he stupidly made that incorrect prophecy all the way back in Egypt Therefore, we know this is still the grudge against Moses. Allah's entire shtick, his whole religion, is all about that grudge against Moses, which is all the more hilarious when you realise that he called his entire peoples Musa alims, family trees of Musa, who is Moses. That's what they call Moses. So we know, even though it's not well recognised today, the entire cult of Islam, even the race of Muslims being called Muslims, they are fake Jews. And we know this because they faked their own version of the Torah, i.e. the Quran is the fake version of the Torah only for Musa alims, and they renamed Arabs who they should be called Musa alims, family trees of Moses, even though they're not related to Moses, and actually they damned the family tree of Moses to death, and their entire cult of Islam is all about killing the actual family of Moses, who are the Jews in Israel. That's what that means. And we move on. So it's interesting to think about the mindset of the Muslim, isn't it? When they are telling themselves that Allah is the only God and they are the chosen people, then they immediately start moaning about how Jews and Moses are the chosen people and that they have just upset Allah by not following his commands of killing themselves and burning their own city down. It's completely insane, but I mean, you only need to look across the pond at how their laws work and the kind of things these guys involve themselves in to know they are actually criminally insane and psychologically not right in the head. Whereas then you look at what Israel are doing in their country. They've got democracy, they've got high technology, they've got good medical products, which they sell to the rest of the world. I can say I'm only alive because of Israeli medical products, which they give me for free, by the way. I get on the NHS for free. And then you look at the Arab countries, what are they doing? Well, they're drinking camel urine, thinking it's a cure for herpes because Mohammed told them. And they are eating locks of Mohammed's hair, thinking this will give them a health blessing. See the hadiths for that one, we'll cover it in a future episode. So that's what this means, and we'll carry on to verse 124. 124. And remember... So Allah's going to tell us another big fat lie now, because he always does that. And remember, even though you weren't there and you can't possibly have ever known this, please remember this as if it's true. That's what and remember means. So, and remember that Abraham was tried by his Lord with certain commands which he fulfilled. He said, I will make thee an imam to the nations. He pleaded, and also imams from my sons. He answered, but my promise is not within the reach of the evil Jews. End of verse. So it actually says evildoers, but I'm in the, in my head I'm translating this into the real meaning. So it doesn't say evil Jews, it says evildoers there. Because Muslims are going to whinge. But we know evildoers does refer to the Jews while we're speaking of the Quran. So, breaking it down, and remember, we told Abraham. So this hasn't happened yet. We only know about Abraham because of his accounts in the Torah. Abraham was the first person who ever actually spoke to God and requested that God protect him and his children because he was in dire straits. He was in a bad situation. That's how the relationship between man and God came about. Before that, God wasn't speaking to humanity because Adam and Eve had upset God and God had thrown them out of the Garden of Eden. And then we had the whole Cain and Abel thing where God was upset with humanity again. So there was a period of time where God wasn't really speaking to humanity. He wasn't ignoring humanity. It's just humanity had stopped delivering prayers to him. And he was waiting for them to realise how bad life was without God in their life. So Abraham prayed to God, who at the time he didn't know the name of. So he was called Elohim. And that in the Hebrew language means Lord of all mercies. It's like you don't know. It's almost like saying unknown God of mercy. That's what Elohim means. So Abraham's Lord was Elohim, and we know that from his own writings, which are recorded in the Torah and the Old Testament. But not according to Allah. Allah's telling his Muslims a big fat lie. So let's go through what he says. And remember, O Muslims, even though you weren't there and this is a falsified testimony, nicked from the Torah, and remember that Abraham was tried by his Lord with certain commands, which he fulfilled. So he's saying there, Elohim said to Abraham, if you follow my advice, you will indeed get through this tough time. Not only that, your sons will not just survive, but they'll go on to create a huge, powerful nation, a righteous nation called Israel. That's why your son Jacob in future is going to change his name and become Israel. His physical name will be Israel, and he will be the one whose son becomes the first king of Israel. That's what they're talking about here. He was tried by his Lord with certain commands, which he fulfilled. You know, Abraham we're talking about. And he said, I will make thee an imam to the nations, as in Allah said this to Abraham. Now we know there wasn't such a thing as imams at the time. Imams is a thing that comes out of the Quran being written, and as we know, the Quran wasn't fully written and finished until 532 AD. At this point, Abraham is alive 3,000 years BC, or 4,000 years BC, a long, 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 long time before this book is ever written, before imams are ever a thing. So we know Allah, once again, is travelling time back and forth. He's placing himself back in the time of Abraham. He's time travelled back to Abraham, so he's trying to insert himself in that story. But by using the word imam, we know he's actually in 400 AD, or 500 AD. That was when the first imams were a thing. And he's also made Abraham into a Muslim who's praying to Allah, even though we know Abraham was praying to Elohim, because his own writings say this, and his sons are... Moses is one of his sons, for instance. So that's what that means. He pleaded, also imams from my offsprings, and then he answered, but my promise is not within the reach of the evildoers. So now Allah has gone back in time to say Abraham's sons are the evildoers. That's what he's saying. The evil Jews and evil Moses, they are the sons of Abraham. Directly, we know this. So they're not the guys who are getting the blessings of Abraham, the blessings of Elohim. It's actually now transferred to the Muslims through this false testimony. So can you see what he's doing here? As we know from a much earlier, much more accurate testimony in the Old Testament, the Torah, before this was even thought of, unwritten, God meets Abraham. Abraham has sons. One of Abraham's sons is Moses. Moses has sons. One of Moses' sons is Judah, or Jacob. Jacob becomes Israel, sets up Israel. Israel has the children of Israel living there. That's why they're called the children of Israel. So that whole descendancy is an unbroken line from Abraham through Moses, through Judah, to Israel, to the children of Israel. One unbroken line leading to Israel. That's where the children of God live. Israel, the children of Israel, are the children of God. That's what we know. Then this little upstart, Mohammed, decided he was going to try and change that and rename his Arabs Muslims, so that they could claim they are the children of Moses, and then spend the rest of his 19 pages whinging about God and Moses and trying to steal the prophets, steal the religion, steal the idea of God, steal everything, and add all this stuff about slavery, genocide, and war. Does that sound like something God would ever allow? No. So we know this guy is in rebellion against God. Further evidence that Allah is in fact Satan, and Muslims are worshipping Satan. That's why this is happening, and that's why he has gone back in time to usurp Abraham, who is the original prophet of Judaism and therefore Christianity, and make him only Muslim. But we know that's not the case, don't we, Allah? From your very writing. So how many mistakes is that now? 37 mistakes and 6.5 lies. In fact, 7.5 lies, because you never actually spoke to Abraham, did you? You didn't make his sons imams. His sons were not imams. His sons were the 12 tribes of Israel. None of those guys were imams. They were all rabbis. Anyway, so that's what that means, and we move on. 125. Remember, we made a house of the place of assembly for men, and a place of safety. And take ye the station of Abraham as a place of prayer. And we covenanted with Abraham and Ismail, Isaac, and that they should sanctify my house for those who compass around it, or use it as a retreat, or bow or prostrate themselves in prayer to Allah. End of verse. So it's a long, boring, very grammatically bad verse. And I feel like it needs to be broken down. So let's break it down. Remember we, Allah's angels, putting a false memory in your head. Remember we made the house. The house has got a capital H, so that's talking about where Israel is now, the land of Canaan. We, Allah's angels, made the house, Canaan, a place of assembly for men and a place of safety. So he's suggesting that before God turns up, which he is claiming is him, Canaan wasn't a place of safety. It was a place where cannibals were roaming, i.e. the account of the Torah is true, that Canaan was full of danger and nobody could settle it. It was a wild, untamed land full of beasts and criminals and cannibals. And that is the reason why when Abraham was travelling through it, he prayed to the Lord of all mercies, Elohim, because he was terrified that him and his wife, because they had no sons at this point, were going to be eaten by cannibals and they were never going to find their way to a safe, holy land to live in. So even though he's trying to claim it for himself, this does actually back up the Torah version of events. Thusly, this book makes Christianity and Judaism true. If you think about it, that's actually what's going on here. Despite Allah claiming it as his and saying his angels did this, him saying that this happened is saying that those accounts are true, because those accounts are much earlier than this and they say it was actually God. And we know, because the Israel guys are still living there and they are still successful and still wealthy and still peaceful, apart from getting attacked by you guys, Muslims, that is probably true because it marries up with physical reality, which Allah and his angels don't seem to want to recognise. And as a little bonus, oh Muslims, neither do you guys. The Muslims, come on now, recognise reality. You'll have a far greater experience and joyful life if you do. So that's what this means. Then we move on. Oh yeah, and then the last bit says, we covenanted with Abraham and Ismail. Now, who is Ismail? Ishmael or Isaac? That's what I think. Even though Ismail is a new name that we don't have mentioned in the old scriptures, I think Ismail is actually Ishmael, whose name is Isaac in Jewish. So, that's who he's talking about there. We covenanted with Abraham and Ismail, even though you didn't. We know from the older scriptures that Abraham's covenant was with Abraham. Abraham's covenant was with God, who is Yahweh. You know, Elohim, before he knew what his name was Elohim. And then when he knew his name, it was Yahweh. So that's God. That's who the covenant is with. And he says, sanctify my house for those who compass around it. Now, who compasses around the land of Canaan? Exactly. Because we know that the Israelites are in that area and they're compassing around it quite happily. That's why they are part of the story now that they've escaped from Egypt. So we know compassing around Canaan is the Israelites. Outside of Canaan is Egypt. That's the only places that we've had mentioned so far. So straight away we can see the current claims of Muslims that they always lived in that area, according to their own scripture, is false. They did not live there. They came from Egypt and they moved in after the Jews had been there. So now Allah's trying to take the credit for that, despite saying he was going to kill them when they moved out of Egypt. Because remember, that's how this land got... Remember, this own testament... Allah's own testimony was that the Jews were slaves in Egypt and that the land across the sea was a desert. It had nobody living there. It had like animals killing people and cannibals who would occasionally be seen there. There was no people living there, according to Allah. Then the Jews escaped with Moses and Allah stood on the shore and said, you filthy ape Jews are going to kill you all in future. That's my prophecy. Expecting that they were going to die alone in the desert. But Moses led them into the desert where they set up Israel, defeated the cannibals, found water, made farming a thing, and they have their lambs of God, you know, have their sheep, their shepherding. And they survive and they build a great nation. So now Canaan is called Israel because nobody else but Israelites live there and there is no other settlements apart from Israel, according to Allah. That's what this means. Then he's trying to slip his way into somewhere he wasn't invited, a thing we know Muslims love to do, by the way, by saying Allah's angels actually covenanted with Abraham, even though Allah's angels were trying to kill Abraham's child Moses and the Jews just a few pages ago in the story of Moses in this very book. So we know Allah is lying again. 9 lies now, because that's 2. The first lie is that he covenanted with Abraham. The second lie is that he's even there at that point. He isn't alive at that point. Allah hasn't been created yet because Abraham's alive 3,000 years before this book and Islam. So, that's what that means. And we carry on to the last verse, 126. So this is going to put a fine detail on what this page is about. 126. And remember, Abraham said, my Lord, make this a city of peace and feed its people with your fruits, such as them as believe in Allah and the last day. And he said, Yea, and as such respect faith. For a while I will grant them pleasure, but soon I will drive them to the torment of fire, an evil abomination indeed. End of verse, end of passage, end of reading. So that was Allah's voice, the grumbly evil voice, and the one before was Abraham. So let's go through it. What does this mean if we break it down? And remember, Abraham said, so now Abraham's talking to God, because they're the only people that say it. God's angels, God, or Allah, and Abraham, but God if you're a Muslim. We made the house a place of assembly for men. That's the bit we went through last. So we know there's no one there. Now we're making it a place of assembly for men with the children of Israel there. Even though we damned them a minute ago and said that they shouldn't be there and they should be dead. So we know Arabs are trying to colonize Canaan, even though it's already got a people there called Israelites. And remember, Abraham said to God, Lord, make this a city of peace. Right, what is the word in the Canaan language which means peace? Sholem, which comes, which becomes shalom later. So we know in the Hebrew language, sholem means peace. How do you say the city of? You say Jah or Jer. So Jerusalem means the city of peace in the old Hebrew language, which this was originally written in this book here. So we know Abraham is saying to God in his language, please let this be Jerusalem. That's even in here. The first city in the desert created with God's blessings by Israel is physically called Jerusalem. And we know that from Allah's own testimony. It was not called a caliphate of Islam. It didn't have an Islamic name. Physically in this book it is called the city of peace, Jerusalem. So we know it was Israel that lived there to begin with, and all this nonsense and war that they cook up in the current day is flat out lies. And they should feel absolutely ashamed of themselves for peddling this garbage while people are getting killed and they are sending their own sons dressed up as little ninjas with rifles into a war they can never win, and they're getting slaughtered by the thousand because they are the aggressors. Islam. Feel shame for that. You should feel absolutely ashamed that you are throwing your own children into a meat grinder for absolutely no reason when your own scripture says the city is called Jerusalem and it is of the children of Israelites. Disgusting people. You should feel absolutely ashamed. I'm not going to let that go. So anyway, back to the verses. Make, Lord, this a city of peace, as in make it Jerusalem, and feed its people with your fruits, such as them as believe in Allah and the last day. Nobody believes in Allah. Why are you saying those that believe in Allah? At this point, this is Abraham talking to God. Abraham has no sons. So it's Abraham and his wife Sarai, there on their own, surrounded by cannibals and beasts, and they have yet to make a city. As we know from this book, and actually this book we'll describe later. So who is Abraham talking about when he says, make them as such as believe in Allah and the last day? He's talking about his unborn sons. He's talking about sons he doesn't know he's going to have yet, because he is still going to get to that bit where he says to God, I haven't had any sons and I'm really old. How is that going to work? And then God says, I don't care how old you are. I can give you sons. I can do anything. And his wife laughs, and that's why she becomes called Sarah. Sarah means the laughing one. So she used to be called Sarai, which means a serious one. But because she laughs at God, because she's old as well, and she thinks I'm like 70 years old, how am I going to have 12 kids? But God says, if you follow my commandments, you will have everything in life that you want. As long as you follow those commandments, you will be fine. That's in the Old Testament, by the way. So it's a much older, much more accurate scripture than this disgusting evil book. And we know because that one actually makes sense when you read it, whereas this one supposes that Abraham is talking to his future children via Allah, who's there from the future. He shouldn't even be there. Saying, make this a city of peace, i.e. make this city called Jerusalem, even though there's no one else there. And then saying it's for Arabs. He's just an insane psycho, that's all I can say. Muslims, please, wakey now. Use your intelligent, inquiring mind and Wikipedia, because I know your education ain't all that great. It's not your fault, it's Allah's fault. Look, the city of peace. What is the word for peace in your language? It is a similar word to shalom. What is the word for town or city in your language? It is a word similar to Shah. So, Jerusalem is the city of peace. Whether it's in Arabic language, whether it's in Hebrew language, whether it's in the modern kind of Anglified way of saying it, Jerusalem, no language says that that is an Islam city. So how can Allah claim he was the one that covenanted Abraham when the city is called Jerusalem and Jerusalem is the first city of Israel? Come on now, think about it, Muslims. You are going to war, sending your children to war, and then they die for this lie that Satan has told you to kill you. If you weren't doing this, there would be peace with you guys. You wouldn't have poverty, you wouldn't have war, you would have exactly what the rest of us all get. Many blessings and peace and prosperity and a full belly. So just think about that. Then he finishes off the verse. This is Allah talking to Abraham. I will grant them their pleasure for a while. So he's talking about the Jews, the children of Israel, who a minute ago he said weren't there. So we know he is definitely a invading force looking to occupy the land of Canaan, because he's even saying to Abraham, who he's saying is an Allah guy, for a while I will grant them pleasure, those guys who already live here, the children of Israel, but I will soon drive them out to a fire of torment. So if they don't live there, Muslims, why do you have to drive them out to a fire of torment? And why do you have to wait a while to do it? Perhaps they are stronger than you. And this isn't talking about the time of Abraham. This is talking about the post-Moses era, when Israel has become a great nation and the children of Abraham and Moses do live there. And you have your poverty-stricken, no army left Egyptians to go and fight them with, and you are weak. So that is the reason why Allah has to say to you, I'm going to let them live there for a while, then I'm going to drive them to fire and torment. And I'm going to do that by lying to you to make you think that the children of Israel are the invading, occupying, genocidal, guys, when it is actually you lot. According to this, your scripture. Then the last line says, I will soon drive them to torment, an evil destination indeed. End of verse. So he is saying the evil fire that he's going to send Jews and Christians and everybody else to after he's let them have the pleasure of their lives, because he doesn't have power over them all, is going to be an evil fire. So far we know of Allah, he is a big fat liar, he is a genocidal, occupying general of mad, uneducated Muslims who are only pissed off and angry because they don't have food. Why don't they have food, oh Muslims? Because you drove the Jews out who were making the food. That was you. That wasn't the Jews' fault. Like I said, you didn't have to make them slaves in Egypt. You could have offered them just to live there. Then they would have set up Israel in Egypt. Egypt would have been the great, powerful, successful, well-fed kingdom with God's many blessings. But because of this guy, Allah, you enslaved them. You ignored God's 4 warnings. Please let my people go, otherwise you'll get 7 plagues. Then you got 7 plagues. Then when you let the people go, you've sent your army into the sea and they all drowned. That's the reason why Arab countries are doing so poorly. It's nothing to do with the Jews or Christians. Take responsibility, Muslims. It's you. It's your bad behaviour, your lack of strategic planning, your terrible ideas, and your adherence to Satan's false religion in this book, the Quran of the Muslims. So let this be a lesson to you, Muslims. I won't be telling you again. Your problems are caused by you. God can help you, but God is not Allah. And trying to kill the Jews and Christians when you clearly are inferior in every single way, in terms of military, in terms of education, in terms of country power, in terms of righteousness, in terms of your scripture, in terms of physical fighting on the ground. You can't even kill these guys. They are slaughtering you in a war that you started. If you just stop all of that, you will be forgiven for it. Then you can have peace. But if you keep chasing that down, death is for you, as we can see. So that's the end of this video. In conclusion of that page, I got a bit angry reading it, as you saw there. We can see Allah is hell-bent on brainwashing his Muslims into blaming all their problems on the Jews and Christians and absolutely not asking Jesus Christ for forgiveness for their many sins. Even so far as he is travelling back in time now to say Abraham was actually his, all Abraham's sons were actually his. Jerusalem was actually his, even though it's an Israeli word and it has no, even in Arabic it means the same thing. So we know, even on the strength of the Quran, there are two types of Muslims: ignorant brainwashed ones that believe it, and liars who know it's false but say it anyway for their own benefit. Those are the guys that are going to God's evil fire. Don't let it be you, O Muslim. Pray to Jesus, you will be forgiven, you can live in peace, you can have the prosperity and blessings of God like the rest of the world are getting, and not be perpetually getting beaten by Israel in a war that you stupidly started. Okay? So that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed that and you learned something. God bless you all, and I'll see you lovely people in the next one. Bye now. Apologies there for my totally out of character ranting. It does make me angry reading this book, but that's why I'm reading it to you, to save you the trouble. So if you want more Without Lies, Islam Dies, meet me back here tomorrow. In the meantime, have a lovely day, God bless you all, and I'll see you lovely people in the next one. Bye!